What do you do when you get conflicting feedback about your game and how you should move it forward? How do you decide which feedback is most important? What if you're stuck between deciding whether your game is a solo game, a co-op game, or a multiplayer competitive game? Should you include several different versions in the same game? We'll be considering those questions and more in this episode of Design Doctor. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video where I'll have some general advice that I've taken from this entry that you can apply to your own designs. Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time board game designer based in Australia, and to date I've published over 60 games all around the world. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, including what it's like working as a full-time designer in the industry, and tips and tricks for new designers to improve their own craft and their designs. In this episode of Design Doctor, I'm going to be looking at the game Set in Space by Stephen Smith. Thanks very much, Stephen, for submitting your game. So first, let's take a look at how Stephen would describe his game. Set in Space is a solo set collection game that's both tense and exciting. Each turn, launch your rocket and visit 3 unique destinations, collecting sets of planets, moons, spacecraft and more. Okay, seems fairly straightforward. What's the biggest problem that Stephen's facing in the game? So Stephen writes, the game is finished, or so I thought, but now I'm unsure of how to proceed with the feedback I received from the Cardboard Edison competition. The feedback was very positive, but the more constructive criticism I'm stuck on how to proceed. So one judge said, I like the theme and combined with what looks like a neat little puzzle. The decisions look simple and interesting, but is there enough replayability? It seems like a neat puzzle I will play for one sitting, get a decent score, and then never play again. I would see if there are any ways that you can scale difficulty up and down. For example, in Pandemic, you can adjust how many epidemic cards there are, and how many event cards go into the deck to make it more or less difficult. Another judge had a similar sentiment. I'm a sucker for set collection games, and when I look at this one, it not only scratches that itch, but gives me an almost Balatro feel. I like the variety with the set collecting, as well as the hidden info. The special powers are a nice touch to deal with luck mitigation. I would love to play this game. I think that's already a really good sign. I think my major concern will come to replayability. How many times can you play this game by yourself? I would like to see other varieties of multi-layer set collection. Also, I would like to also see how this game can be enhanced for dual or multiplayer. And so Stephen says that they've tried experimenting with a multiplayer version, but it resulted in too much luck of the draw as to what cards were available on a given player's turn, where this is not an issue in the solo version. They then developed a co-op version, which worked much better, but they're unsure if it's strong enough to be included in the final game. So in the end, they're stuck on 2 main points: how to improve the replayability of the solo version, and whether a co-op or multiplayer version is necessary. Okay, those seem like some really well-defined issues that Stephen's having, and I hope on this episode I can help you out with a few thoughts of my own. So first, let's take a look at the gameplay video for the game to get an idea of how the game works.
Prepare for launch. In Set in Space, you're an astronaut exploring the vast reaches of our solar system. Each turn, launch your rocket and visit 3 unique destinations, collecting sets of planets, moons, spacecraft, and more. But this is not your typical set collection game that requires a high player count. Designed with solo play in mind, Set in Space delivers an experience that is both tense and exciting. Want to share the adventure? Then team up with a friend in the 2-player cooperative mode. Set in Space is played over 3 rounds, each with 3 turns. Each turn, launch one of your 3 rockets to an unexplored row or column on the grid. Collect all 3 cards from your chosen coordinate.
I should say, I'm probably already going to like this game. As those who know my designs, I'm quite a sucker for 3x3 grids. I use something similar in Monumental.
And then refill the grid with new cards. With each rocket launched, the decisions become more difficult. Like any good space explorer, you must plan ahead. There are 2 special cards to help you on your journey. The Sun allows you to reveal 1 face-down card. The Wormhole allows you to swap any 2 cards on the grid. But you can only use each of these special cards once per round, so use them wisely. Here is an example round. Saturn shines brightly in the top row, which would add to our set of planets. But Mariner 10 in the middle row would also be good, as it scores for having Mercury. This is a tough choice. To help me decide, I will use the Sun to flip over this face-down card. It's a Jupiter moon. As I have already collected 2 Jupiter moons, this card would earn me an additional 5 points. Let's choose the middle row. Refilling the grid reveals Earth's moon, a perfect addition to my collection. but it's in an already explored row and column. Now's the time to use the wormhole card. By swapping Earth's moon with the Kuiper Belt, I can launch to the top row and also claim Saturn. With a shuffled deck of 45 space cards and with the element of hidden information, you cannot use the same strategy from one game to the next. It's this balance between tactical and strategic choices that makes Set in Space so much fun to play. Good luck out there in space. And thanks for watching.
Just to give a brief overview, I guess, of what I think about the video, I think it's a really good video. It's really clear. I can already understand how to play pretty much. Obviously, there's going to be some details in the scoring and the types of cards that will generate the kind of feeling of the game, but I can already see how the puzzle works and how that might produce interesting decisions. I think the video got directly to the point. I especially like the point where the video slowed down and clearly explained one particular round and the kind of thinking that would go into the decisions that you would make. I think previously that I was a little bit worried that the video was going through the rules and the gameplay very quickly, and it was a little bit hard to keep up with it. But when you had that slowed down section, which clearly explained a round, that was really useful. And it's pretty much in my head now. I think I'd really understand how the game works. And additionally, having an online version that you're showing in the video, it's certainly an advantage in a game like this, which is reasonably simple and you can easily show in one shot. But having that direct gameplay video in this particular instance, I think is very effective. So yeah, thumbs up for the video, and it's actually even shorter than what Cardboard Edison requires. They gave you up to 3 minutes, this is 2.5 minutes. So well done there. Doesn't waste any time getting to it, sets up the theme quite well, but also doesn't spend too much time on it. Yeah, very well done. Steven's actually provided a digital prototype of the game that's playable. This is hosted in playingcards.io. I'll leave a link to the website in the description below. It's a really useful prototyping tool. It runs in a browser, so anybody can join from anywhere around the world. You don't have to download any software to be able to use it. So it's a really handy playtesting tool. I've used it a bit with some collaborators and playtesting other people's games, and it's always worked quite well. And for a card game like this, which is reasonably simple, I think it's a really good idea. But the great thing in this case is I can play it myself and get a bit of a feel for the game. And I'm looking forward to trying it. Okay, so that was actually quite fun to play and it was pretty engrossing. That's a sign of a good game to start with, I would say. Going back to the issues that Steven has with the game and the questions he's asking. So the first part is to how to work on the replayability of the solo version. I think with a game like this, you could have particular goals. Collecting all 5 of Saturn's moons, for instance, could be a particular goal, and you're really trying to do that in the game. It might feel a little bit capricious as to whether you achieve these goals or not. For instance, with the idea of collecting all 5 of Saturn's moons. Just down to the deal of the cards might make that impossible, so that makes it a bit difficult. In some ways, I would be tempted to include in the game more cards that acted like special abilities and had scoring attached. Cards like the International Space Station, for instance, which let you swap it with a card that's already in the tableau. You're kind of banking a pick for the future. And that was really interesting when I had that card. I feel like at the moment there's probably only 2 or 3 cards that work like that. And I wonder if you increase the number of cards, maybe to say 25%, that might give players more different experiences in how they play the game. Those special powers will come up at different points. Some games you'll have more of them or less of them. So you have more or less control in particular circumstances. And I think that could be quite interesting. I also think introducing those action cards will do a lot to change the feeling of play. So I think you have 2 main aspects that you can alter. You can change the actual things that you're collecting and how that scoring changes. And that can be interesting. But I think what's more powerful in terms of giving that feeling of replayability is the actual feeling you have when you're playing the game and the kind of decisions you're making. So in the game as it is, each game you have roughly the same decisions. You're basically just trying to maximize your points between picking card A or card B or this card set or this card set. But the moment you introduce other decision points, so you can have this idea of when do I use this particular power? How do I use it potentially in conjunction with another power? And even more than that, how many powers do I even have to use in this game? All of those variations will give different feelings to a player. If you play a game where you have very few of these special power cards, you're going to feel like you don't have a lot of control. Certain things are going to be much riskier because potentially you're going to take a lot of cards face down, for instance. And it's going to feel like a lot like you're pushing your luck. That might disincentivize collecting sets which are a bit dangerous, like the Saturn Moons. Compare that with a game where you have a lot of these variable power cards. You're going to feel much more in control and you're making much more strategic decisions. Then the game is not so much about pushing your luck. It's almost like this engine building game where I have these powers and how do I use them in the most efficient way? How do I use them together in interesting ways? And those variations in feeling of play, I think, will add a lot more to the feeling of replayability overall that a player would experience. And I think that can be added without necessarily adding a lot of cards to the deck. I think just adding powers to some of the existing cards would be enough. You can have some cards which have a power and a simple scoring condition. I think that would be fine. In the game, you already have 2 special power cards that are always available each round, the Sun and the Wormhole. You could have more of those cards, and in each game you choose 2 of them randomly. Even having 6 of these special power cards that are always available and you only choose 2 each game will give a lot of variety as well. I should say the other thing you can have with scenarios is you can manually set different difficulties or scoring conditions for existing cards. For example, even having a rule like, in this game, planets score double suddenly makes planet collection much more important, and it's about maximizing your score in that particular way. So I think you can add a lot of different ways to push players in different ways to collect things by just having these scenarios written in the rules. They don't necessarily even have to add extra components. And then we come to the second part of your question about whether a co-op or a multiplayer competitive version is necessary. I can definitely see the issues that you have if you have a competitive game, that it might feel quite lucky about what cards are selected. And I think unfortunately you start to stray into similar territory of a lot of other set collection games. You essentially become a set collection game with a particular gimmick of how you select cards. I would say that gimmick doesn't do much to help you stand out from the crowd, and there are a lot of set collection card games. I think you have a much stronger position as a solo puzzly game, and even as an app, honestly. It works really well digitally, and you can imagine this being on Board Game Arena or as a standalone app in that solo version. And also, if you have a digital version, it's much easier to add these different rules or scenarios or powers for each game. In terms of a co-op version, I could see how that might work, but again, I'm not really sure how much it would be adding to the game unless you are able to add a specific component of the decision making that makes sense that the players are working together. I think that's really important when you're ever thinking of introducing a co-op version of a game, is there has to be a reason for it to be co-op and not just a multiplayer solitaire type of version where one player can effectively make all the decisions. So I would be thinking about what are some specific tweaks you could make to the mechanisms that would make sense, say in a 2-player co-op version, which I think is what you said you were working on. Something that comes to mind immediately is that one player is only taking from the rows and another is taking from the columns. Potentially, we each play one rocket to a row and a column, and maybe the card which intersects for both of us is a card that's actually discarded, which is kind of interesting, could produce some interesting tension because we're working with each other. And one player, say I'm looking at the columns, I'm really interested in that particular decision point. How can I put cards in a column that are very useful? You're looking at a different way in the rows. And not only that is we're trying to work out, well, what card can we both give up? Because that would be the card that overlaps and is automatically discarded. And of course, then you have the powers, which we have to decide how to use between us in an interesting way. So I think actually a co-op version could work. I think it would be an interesting addition. It would make a lot more sense to put this 2-player co-op version in. And I think with a rule tweak like the one I suggested or something else that you work on, that makes that version of the game feel like its own entity and that it's introducing new decisions that aren't present in the solo game. I think that's the important thing to make it feel necessary or at least worthwhile that it's present in the game. So in short, I think the game is quite a strong entry. I really enjoyed my play of it. What are some general lessons that you can take away from this particular game that might be useful to your own design practice? The first is that replayability comes from differing ways in which players make decisions and the different ways that players feel during a game. And that replayability is far stronger than replayability coming from simply collecting different cards or seeing different cards in a particular game. I think this is one of the most effective ways to keep this in mind when you're thinking about the replayability question. For instance, if you're going to add more cards to a set collection game, I would always add cards that are going to create a new decision space for players, giving them different actions they can take during a turn that they wouldn't have before, rather than just simply adding more cards for them to collect, which are roughly operating in the same way as all the other cards that you collect in the game. I think the second takeaway from this particular game is if you're considering adding a cooperative mode to an otherwise solo or competitive game, I think you really have to think about how do I introduce points of decision making or communication between the players in that cooperative mode that makes sense in that mode and make it feel distinct from the other modes that the game already exists in. Cooperative games really are a different beast to competitive games, and they have to be designed intentionally. You can certainly use the design skeletons from an existing multiplayer competitive game or solo game as the basis for a co-op mode, but care has to be taken to introduce new concepts or decision points to make the cooperative mode function and be interesting to players who enjoy that style of play. It doesn't necessarily have to be a complex addition. Even adding one simple rule which suddenly introduces points of communication where players have to work together can be enough for that cooperative mode to feel distinct, important, and in fact a great addition to the overall package. And the last point that I think that's particularly important to work on as a designer is learning to separate out problems and solutions in feedback that's given to you on your own designs. In the feedback Stephen got from the Cardboard Edison judges, there is a mix of problems that they've identified with the game, which they think they could be improved on, and then solutions in which those judges themselves suggest solutions to those problems. As a designer, you need to be able to separate out these two things, and realistically, identifying problems is the most important part of a playtest and the feedback that comes later. That's the most important piece of data that your playtesters will give back to you. It's far more important that they identify where there are problems in the game, where it's not working, than they identify what to do to fix them. Ultimately, a good way to think about it is that it's playtesters' job to find the problems, and it's the designer's job to fix them. As always, listen to all the feedback that's given to playtesters. Often it'll be mixed up between problems and solutions, but try and separate them out and really focus on the problems and then think about how you would solve them. The solutions that a playtester offers you are always going to be coloured by their own preferences in games they like to play, and this is even more so if that playtester is also a game designer. But their preferences or design preferences might not match your own preferences or your own goals for that particular game. So don't feel like you have to be swayed by their suggestions for solutions to your problems. It's much more important that you've identified the problems and then go away and solve them yourself. So I hope that was helpful for you, Stephen. Thank you again very much for submitting your game to the Design Doctor series. For everyone who's watched this video, I'd love it if you could add in the comments any thoughts or feedback that you'd give to Stephen that could help him with his design. I was really happy to see a lot of helpful comments on the previous video in the Design Doctor series, and I'd love this to continue to be a great space where we can really support each other in our design journeys. I'll also leave a link in the description where you can submit your game for consideration for the Design Doctor series. And if you have a specific problem you're having with your game, please go ahead and submit it. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and all the best with your game designing. Bye!